Welcome everyone to Getting Classy with me, Redbeard Flynn, where we're going to go into the details that we know of different classes across different MMOs. The first class that we're going to cover is one that I am most likely going to play in Pantheon Rise of the Fallen. Consider this edition of Getting Classy as one of the most speculative. I say that because we don't really have many concrete details about the class that we're going to be discussing today. Water. Our class today is nebulous. They're shrouded in mystery, but like its namesake, they refuse to die. The class that we're discussing today is the Necromancer. You may say, in the case of Pantheon Rise of the Fallen, the Necromancer isn't even around yet. It's not even listed on the PantheonMMO.com website. Essentially, in some ways, it doesn't really exist. Visionary Realms has given us some breadcrumbs about what we can look for with this class in the future, and I want to kind of lay that out here so that if you're looking for this game in the long term, you might get a bit of an idea about this class that is one that I'm very interested in, both from an aesthetic standpoint and just in general what they've been talking about with the class. It sounds very interesting to me. I honestly, if the classes were all available right now, I would probably pick this one. But let's back up a bit. Let's back up to 2018 and an interview scored by none other than Basgrim. Now Basgrim was able to sit down and talk about classes with none other than Chris Joppa Perkins. So in this, we got kind of a bit more about the Necromancer and the Bard than we had in really a lot of the lead up into this. So I want to play that little excerpt here from the interview.
I would probably get in trouble if I didn't ask about the Necro, because you gave us a good little teaser about the Bard, that the Bards are looking pretty good right now. But what about the Necro? Where does the Necro stand right now?
Yeah, so we definitely hear everyone, and we know that it's not only the Bard but also the Necro. That's a very highly anticipated class. So we are wanting as well to get that in, but it's going to depend on how quickly we finish the current classes. And the Bard and Necro just happened to be the next one in line. So if we can get it in, we will. If we can't by launch, then we'll be getting it in as soon after as we can.
Some people might say that until release, we have a little bit of a Schrodinger's Necromancer. It both exists and doesn't exist until we can see it. By some people, I mean me, and I should probably apologize for misusing a complicated scientific concept that is beyond my understanding. So, sorry. It should be noted that on September 1st, 2020, VR posted on the forums that the Necromancer was a stretch class and is not yet officially planned for launch. So this is my disclaimer that if I'm being totally brutally honest with myself, I don't really foresee the Necromancer making it to launch. The Bard, I think, is a bit of a different thing altogether, but the Necromancer, I feel like since Bard has to be implemented first and there's some complexity involved with the Necromancer, there is a higher likelihood of it not being at launch than being at launch. So I think the Necromancer will have to be one of those things that we look forward to rather than expect in the near term. So what do we know about the Necromancers? Well, this is where the Pantheon wiki comes in handy, linked down below. And we'll kind of go over some of the things here, starting with what is the Necromancer? What is this class? Well, in the April 2021 Dev Roundtable, we got that answer a little bit. The Necromancer was described as both a crowd control, or CC, and a damage per second, or DPS. The CC part comes from class balancing. Now, class balancing is important here because in this Dev Roundtable, we'll talk about how currently there are 3 tanks, there are 3 healers, 6 DPS classes, but they're broken down into 3 physical DPS classes and 3 magical DPS classes. That leaves CC, or support, as 1 class, the Enchanter, and that's it. So There's obviously a need here. And what classes do we not have fully announced yet? The Bard, CC makes sense, right? And the Necromancer. So that's where we have it coming in there, that we have the CC filling those two needs. So that makes me think here that perhaps CC is going to be a bigger part of the Necromancer in Pantheon than, say, in Everquest, where for a while you had a very useful, if a bit of a frustrating at times, CC in Screaming Terror. That was really just used in the original game and not really replicated later until you got some of the undead only CC. And then you also threw in there the ability to pull, and then you had rooting and different things like that. So there was still some support with Necromancer, though I don't think anyone who played EverQuest would consider Necromancer much of a support or a CC class. In that same dev roundtable, Kilson also mentioned that items are already showing up in-game that have Necromancer and Bard on them, so they've already started to plan that. The breadcrumbs are there. This is not some wholly unannounced class, despite being not included on the current class roster. I think they're just not ready to include it yet, but it's definitely one of those things where like this is going to happen. And they've talked about before how the classes after those that are currently announced are going to be Bard first and then Necromancer. Anything beyond that we have no idea really, but for those two they have unofficially been announced officially. I don't know exactly how to put it, but essentially yes, they're showing up on items. Implementation of these classes is already something that the dev team is considering. That was expanded upon a little bit in the balance and progression dev stream, also from April of 2021, where they talked about the viability of the Necromancer and Bard being already thought about. The skills and the itemization of those two classes is something that the team is already keeping in mind. This next part I think is one of the cooler things for me when because when I think about the Necromancer class, this is kind of what I envision, and it was really cool to see this in words here. So back in March of 2020, when Minus was still with Pantheon Plus, he scored an interview with Joppa, and in that interview they were talking a little bit about the Necromancer, and Joppa said that the Necromancer was a selfish class, like the Dire Lord. Now this was like, this to me was music to my ears, and you might be wondering, but it's a selfish class. Why is that music to your ears? Well, because if you think about the closest comparisons we have, and I don't want people to start thinking, oh, it's exactly going to be this way, because we don't have enough information yet to start comparing it to other MMO classes, but the Shadow Knight, the Death Knight, the Necromancer, they tend to be selfish classes, right? They may have some support skills, but they come at a cost. You know, you also, like, if you think about how a lot of those classes would heal, it's at the expense of the creature and taking damage from them, and it's only to the self. Or how, I mean, think about Gather Shadows. It was a self-only invisibility spell for the Necromancer. They could, so, you know, screw the rest of the party. Rest of the party can go find an enchanter or a wizard. You know, they can figure their own shit out. The Necromancer's covered though, and that doesn't even get into Feigned Death. But I don't know that any of that type of thought is really going into the Necromancer, but we do at least know that the Necromancer, and by this interview, the Dire Lord, are going to be possibly classes that put themselves first and then the group. And this fits in with what VR has talked about in the past about class fantasy. And it really, to make a class feel unique, I think that class fantasy is important. I think that a lot of times you'll have people that pick classes based off what can this class do, what will the playstyle be, but you'll also have players that pick a class based on, well, I think this looks cool, or this looks interesting or exciting, and they're not looking at the skills, they're looking at the class itself. Well, a Necromancer sounds cool. You're dealing with like the undead and everything like that. That's my kind of thing. And that's what, when I first started playing MMOs, that's what I would do. What sounds cool? You know, I'm recently playing Dragon Age Origins. I didn't pick a class that made sense. I picked, well, this is a duelist and it sounds cool. You know, so I think that it's important to have that class fantasy, because it creates a different kind of connection to the class that doesn't rely on numbers. Now, these last two bits are a bit of a bit older information. We're kind of working backwards here. But in December 2019, during the dev play session, it was confirmed that Necromancers will have pets. So we can all rest a little easier with the idea that yes, a necromancer will have a pet. I'm excited about that. I'm excited to see how. I mean, I can think of so many different ways that you might be able to combine the CC part of the class with a pet. You know, can you lock down like a creature with your pet? What, like, it'll be interesting seeing how they implement this, especially because when you look at the summoner, Pantheon has been talking a lot about how much they're putting into the pet system. And so I think that this will be interesting to see how does that impact the necromancer and the necromancer pet as we go forward. Now this last bit is probably the biggest stretch because it's also one of the oldest things, and we had to, like, to get this information, the Wayback Machine was needed, and we had to pull from a reader question. Essentially, the question was asking about two different types of abilities: the wizard's the ability to regenerate mana, and the enchanter's ability to drain mana, and if those abilities would translate to other classes, as in like the necromancer, which was named specifically. And the response that was given is that those abilities are unique to those classes. Meaning, you know, reading between the lines, that you're not going to be getting a lich spell for your necromancer, at least as of 2019. That could have all changed, especially when you think about in January 2022, the team was already talking about how they were looking at how regeneration worked in the game. So I think this is still really up in the air when it comes to the necromancer and how this will eventually work out. So to recap, probably the most difficult class to make a video on for Pantheon Rise of the Fallen. Why did I pick this class as my first one of these videos? You know what? Because it's cool. That's why. Necromancers are cool. They just kind of always have been. The recap is that they are both a CC and a DPS. That has been said multiple times throughout, so I think we can consider that to be pretty concrete information. It'll be a selfish class like the Dire Lord. Cool. And they'll have pets. And that's really all we have on the Necromancer in Pantheon Rise of the Fallen. Thank you for joining me for this first edition of Getting Classy, focused on the Necromancer of Pantheon Rise of the Fallen. In future editions of this series, we'll be talking about classes that are not quite as obscure as the Necromancer, classes that have more meat and depth to them than what we currently have for this class, especially when we're going into games that are released like Everquest II, those kind of things. So now, though, I have a question for you. What do you think about the Necromancer in Pantheon Rise of the Fallen? Do you think it'll be released? Do you think it'll lean more heavily toward DPS, or will it be more of a CC class? What are your thoughts on that? Are you excited about this take on the Necromancer? Let me know in the comments down below, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. My name is Redbeard Flynn. I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful day. I swallowed a lot of... Oh, that was not worth it. Is this poisonous?